and they're directly responsible for the name of this website. He's about to release his 11th and final solo record entitled Weltschmerz. It's an honor and a pleasure to welcome Derek Dick, better known as Fish. Welcome, Fish.
Hello, Jeff. How are you doing across there in Connecticut? Is it sunny where you are?
It is. It's a beautiful fall day today, nice and crisp outside.
You're lucky. we just had the deluxe versions of the album arrive today, which came over from Holland. And lo and behold, it's like the loading happened. The Scottish Skies did what the Scottish Skies do best, and they absolutely pushed down. Right?
Oh no!
Everybody's running, but everything's good, Yeah, because we're right in the middle of the album launch, which is really strange. During this time, it's like you feel, with the lockdowns and everything. I mean, we are kind of in a little lockdown situation in where I live now, in Scotland, and and it's weird because you feel kind of detached and isolated from everything. I mean, I'm sitting here, doing an interview with you across the United States, and I'm sitting here in Scotland watching, four guys all socially distanced, wearing masks and everything through the main control room floor, putting stickers on and packaging albums to go out. It's just really strange. It's surreal.
Yeah, you can't see the person next door, but you could talk to somebody on the other side of the world.
Yeah. Well, I'm lucky. I mean, I'm actually in the control room of the studio. I live in a studio that I built in 1991, and I'm glad I did. For many years, it was a concrete albatross around my neck. I used to live next door, and then I went through. I had the double whammy of a divorce and and basically a bank order. So I sold the house and sold all the bits, kept the studio, and now I live here. And it's the best place I've ever lived in. And where I'm talking to you now, I'm in the control room where I recorded 10 of those 11 solo albums. So it's going to be quite strange with this being the last album that, I'm in a control room that basically next summer will be stripped back to brick and rebuilt as a writing room as a library vibe. Oh.
Yeah, and you announced a few years back that the plan was, to release this one last record and tour the whole cycle and then retire.
Yeah.
Over the years, have you kind of wavered at all in that, or has it just kind of solidified your decision?
Since 2015, it's just been solidifying. And I think with COVID in particular, I mean, it's really weird. I'm actually taking a gap here from my retirement. It's really strange. I mean, the idea with 215 was to take Misplaced Childhood out, do that as a full album, full performance, say goodbye to that, then do Clutching at Straws, and that was supposed to be with the Weltschmerz album, but because of delays, we went out kind of half-cocked on Weltschmerz, but we had a great Clutching at Straws tour.
Right.
And the idea was to have, Weltschmerz should have been out in 2017, but, with everything that happened along the journey, it just got knocked back. And now, we're sitting here with the album, but with a tour that was supposed to have, this album, the Weltschmerz album, and the Vigil in the Wilderness and Mirrors album as a full performance, that's all been kiboshed by COVID. So, all my touring this year is gone, and we're talking about, next year, and I've got a European tour that's been replaced for next autumn. But in all reality, I can't see it happening. I mean, people are talking about this going on for months and months on end, and I can't see any vaccine happening until the end of autumn, no matter what anybody says, right? And and I think we're going to be resigning to social distancing, and I cannot play reduced capacity gigs at social distance. It doesn't make financial sense. So my whole retirement plan has kind of been marched off the rails a little bit. But I mean, I think what's going to happen is that basically we'll ignore the Weltschmerz and Vigil tour and just go straight into the final tour. And on the final tour, what I really want to do is go out and play. Go to all the cities and towns that I've really enjoyed playing across my entire career and play 2 nights in a venue that I love. So I've got 2 completely different set lists. And obviously, if the tour doesn't happen next year, as it's more in all likelihood seems it's not going to happen, then the Weltschmerz tour will be in 2022, and it will be final album, final tour at the same time. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, and You mentioned how the Weltschmerz record was originally supposed to be out in 2017. You announced the title and everything, really started the whole process back around 2015. And for those who don't know the title, it means, a sadness or a melancholy over the state of the world. Yeah. Could you have imagined then how prophetic that title would be by the time the album finally came out?
No idea. They will burn me at the stake as a witch. Right? I will be imprisoned in a very dark cell in the deepest dungeon of the darkest castle. It's yeah, I mean, it was when Weltschmerz, when the idea came to me, I like to get an album title in early. I mean, I think every album I've ever started, including Misplaced Childhood, I had the album title right at the very beginning, and that's like a lightning rod. And the Weltschmerz, I was living a lot of my life in Germany. My wife Simona, we got married in 2017, but back in 2015, she was living in Karlsruhe down the south of Germany, and I was living across in Scotland near Edinburgh. So, and we had an international relationship, and I was spending 4 months of my life, in Germany, very much immersed in the Germanic. And I speak German. My first wife was German. My daughter's half German. It's been a strange thing. It was and being out there, I was switching on the TV and watching the Syrian war start to unfold. The civil war happened, and at the same time there was the refugee crisis that was developing, and particularly in Germany at that point. And it kind of, every time you put the news on, I was feeling a sense of helplessness, being overwhelmed. And that was why I picked up Weltschmerz. But I mean, the idea was I didn't want to write about big politics, big corporate, big bank, big, whatever. I wanted to strip it all down to characters. I mean, what I write best about is kind of observational writing and putting characters in a situation. So all the songs in Weltschmerz are like little mini screenplays, people living, existing on this planet, in this world that we inhabit at this moment in time, which is one of an incredibly stressful and it's not a pleasant environment if every time you switch on the TV. And I think there's a lot of social issues and especially mental health issues that have manifested themselves in recent years because of what we're being subjected to as citizens of the world.
Yeah, and each song, I mean, first of all, it's a huge record. It's filled with, epic pieces that have really defined your solo career. And each track kind of carries that theme of Weltschmerz through its characters. I mean, to some extent, is there kind of a reflection of you in each of what those characters are going through?
Absolutely. I mean, as I said, 2015, I went out with the Childhood album and the farewell performances. And then in 2016, I had to redo some of the performances I had to reschedule because my keyboard player, John Beck, at the time, broke his arm outside a hotel. And I'd gone down with, ironically, I went down with a horrific respiratory virus on the German tour. And I replaced the dates, and I came back, and my dad had been pretty ill before I went out. He was starting to, there was things happening that were looking like an end game. And when I came back from the tour, it was we were right back at his end of days. And, when he died, the effect it had on me was a lot more than I had prepared myself for. I mean, I thought I'd kind of steeled myself for his death, but when it happened, it hit me a lot harder than I ever thought. And I basically lost to 2016, which ended with an operation for a recurrent spinal problem that I'd had. And then 17, I had another big operation on my rotator cuff in my shoulder, which took me out of the game for about 2 months. And I didn't really write the first lyric, which was "Little Man What Now," until the end of 17. But that was and then throughout dealing with my father's death and through 16 and 17, there's a Scottish saying which my head was full of chocolate frogs. Right, my head was full of chocolate frogs. I couldn't write. I had writer's block, and there was so much in there, swirling around and churning inside me, but I just couldn't get it down on the paper. And it wasn't until I sat down and put the "Little Man What Now" lyric down that it started to move. But I mean, even then, we had, 2018, that was, like I said, the Clutching tour. And then, when I moved into 19, I had 2 bouts of sepsis within months of each other, which nearly killed me. And there was a lot of hurdles. There was a lot of minds strewn along that path, to get to the finished article. And it wasn't really till mid 2019 that we really went into full beam on the writing of the album, and of course recording at the end of 19 into 20. So it was tough. But I mean, go back to something you asked earlier on. I mean, I've never diverted from the path since 15, saying like, right, this is how I'm going out. This was always going to be my last album. I mean, there is no more.
And we mentioned earlier, kind of some of those epic tracks, the record, particularly Rose of Damascus. In the past, you've had songs like Plague of Ghosts with the famous Head Full of Chocolate Frog section, and High Wood. Do you feel a freedom when you write something that's more akin to an epic poem set to music as opposed to a more traditional song structure?
Yeah, I mean that's why I was attracted to progressive rock music right in the first instance. I mean, I was brought up as a teenager, and I was listening to Yes, Genesis, Floyd. I wasn't really into the glam rock thing. I mean, as much as I appreciate the songs, but it was so I was always, and I don't play an instrument, therefore lyrics has always been my mainstay. And one of the things that's very important to realize is I'm a writer who can sing. I'm not a singer who can write, and that is a very important kind of it's important to realize that. I mean, it's and a song like Rose of Damascus. I mean, the approach that was immense. It involved a lot of research, in the same ways as High would do. I mean, I put a lot of research into my lyrics to make sure that I'm catching the right vibe, saying the right things. I mean, there's some touchy subjects out there that it's easy to become flippant with, and I treat them with respect. And I think, and Rose of Damascus was it was an idea that came from Channel 4 as a news station across here that is quite. I mean, I think America, as you call it, liberal. It's a left wing kind of news program, and one that I really enjoy. I take a lot of information from, and they had a section at the end of one of the news hours, and it was about the gardener of Aleppo, and it was a man who was running a garden centre in Aleppo while it was under bombardment, and they interviewed him there, and they were talking about, and he said but growing plants and putting them onto the roundabouts in Aleppo, because the roundabouts were always famous for flowers. And he went out and planted flowers on the roundabouts of Aleppo to give some sense of normality. And I really loved that. And, and being a gardener myself, and also having the garden as a sanctuary for me, after my father's death. I mean, it's where I lost and found myself. It was, I kind of liked that story. And I started to research it. I mean, that was going to be, the original title was The Gardener of Aleppo or whatever. And then I started to move through it and started to research Syria and Damascus, the civil war. And it just became a far more elaborate picture. And I needed to address that without going into the aforesaid big politics, big war, And I wanted to strip it all down. And I was looking for an end to get this lyric. While I was researching, and I was always looking for a flower that was associated, with it. And I went Damascus, okay, and I found the damask rose, and the damask rose is one of the oldest roses. That is one of the basic roses in the European kind of cultivar or whatever it is. It's one of the base roses for a lot of the European hybrids, and the flower of the damask rose was famous for its perfume, which is why it was harvested. And I started to read more about it, and I came across the fact that the damask rose is actually endangered because most of the areas where the roses are in the middle of the battlefields, and nobody's tended them because of the war and existing minefields and stuff. So and I was intrigued by this, and then I found out that the original damask rose, was as mythology goes, it was brought back by a French knight in 1345, and he found a rose at the foot of the walls of Damascus during the siege in 1345, and brought it back to France, and that is why it became the kind of one of the foundation roses in the European cultures. And I just saw I saw the story right there. And and with the refugee, I just saw the rose as being the symbol. And with that, I decided to invest all the properties and devise the storyline about a young woman. So the young woman in herself becomes the rose, becomes the bud, becomes the flower that is heading towards France, And that's why the song ends as it does, where they're just going under the water and actually holding, a damask rose that she found in the rubble and, whatever city she was in, But, I love developing that theme. I mean, that's why, people say, well, what are you going to do after music? I want to write screenplays. I mean, Damascus is a film, It's the music and everything, the entire approach that Callum Malcolm and Steve Ansis and I had was, it is going to be cinematic,
Yeah, and it's funny hearing you explain that and how, kind of gardening got you through the time with your dad and led to something like Rose of Damascus. And I think that's also a theme on this record. There's that sense of world weariness, but there's also that sense, using the garden metaphor with the Rose of Damascus and Garden of Remembrance, of sort of a rebirth and hope in it as well.
Yeah. I think in it, I'm always been somebody that's looked for the positive. I mean, throughout my life, I've had to fight through some pretty desperate situations. And, the one thing I always realize is if you lie on the floor and curl up in a ball, you're going to take a kicking, And and I've always been, as soon as I get taken out, I'm up on my feet as fast as I can and I'm back in, And that's, with Weltschmerz, I mean, I think that comes across in the Weltschmerz lyric. I think especially in the title track as well.
Yes.
Where it's like, I may be old, but I mean, there's still a fire burns in this belly.
And looking through your career, I think it's pretty safe to say that your closest collaborator through that time has been the enormously talented Mark Wilkinson. And it's amazing to see how his art have brought your words to life over the last 40 years. Talk a bit about the creative process that you and Mark share.
Well, I mean, for example, in Weltschmerz, I mean, right from the very start, I talked about, the idea, the themes of the album. And, I was sending Mark down lyrics and demos, throughout the entire creative process. I mean, he's kept up to speed with what we're doing and he knows kind of where we're at. And when I originally mentioned the idea of, gardens, flowers, plants, etc., and he came up with this kind of amalgam, this kind of half man, half plant thing, this emerging this new emerging creature that was happening. And I liked that idea, and we kind of followed that. He followed that down there. There was a couple of moments where, we did have our, differences in opinion on where things were going. But, Mark came up with images and I just kind of move him down, into certain areas. And it worked well. But I mean, when we came up with the idea, I mean, the deluxe version of this album, it's got 100 pages in it. And, we right at the start, we said, okay, if we're going to end with an album, this is the final album, we've got to put our package together that defines it's the final album, that represents, the peak. And we went, let's do 100 pages in a hardback with a slipcase. And then it was like, at the time we were on, it's like 100 pages. And Mark actually said to him, I said, I'm going to write sleeve notes. And all the remasters, all my solo albums have all been remastered. And in every one, there's about between 8,000 and 12,000 words of sleeve notes, right? And I said to Mark, I said, how many words are you looking for? How much space do you need? And at the beginning, he said, about 2,500, right? And then I started writing in my own particular peculiar manner. And I phoned him and said, Mark, I've got 8,000 words here. Right? He went, don't worry, I can fit it in. And I was like just fixing all that. He was just filling in all the gaps. But it gave us a great space to work in. I mean, that booklet, and my lyrics are by no means kind of short.
That's sort of been the trademark over the career, and I think that's really what draws people to you, are the depths of those lyrics.
Yeah, but I mean, that's where I want to go, Jeff. I mean, once this is done, I mean, I've said this, it's the last album, and, when the final tour's going, I mean, I'm going to be in a book writing. There are memoirs to write, there's novels to write, there's screenplays to write. I just want to write. I love words, and and I'm of an age where I'm a realist. I am not going to be playing arenas anytime soon, and I'm destined to be on a nightliner trundling through a European, countryside in the middle of the night heading towards the next city. This is what I'm going to be doing, and I do not want to be doing that when I'm 65. When I was working even in the midst on that Farewell to Childhood tour and the Last Clutching tour, sleeping on a bunk in a bus, when you're 6'5", and it's after you've just done a 2-hour show, it's hard going on you. I find recovery a lot harder, a lot more difficult now. And I decided, that's where it's going to be. And after the touring's done, I want to go into my garden. I want to get involved with writing. As I said, next summer, this control room will be stripped right back to brick. And then I am going to sit in it for 2 months and then rebuild this into a completely different writing chamber.
Yeah, and looking back over your career now, is you're about to put out this last record. Is there a song or songs that you feel define who you are as an artist?
Weltschmerz.
That's the last song on the record.
No, I'm talking about the album.
The album.
The thing is, I don't write tracks, and this is another reason why I want to leave this industry. The album is becoming a dated format now. People write tracks. It's a collection, it's a bundle. I still write albums. When I approached Weltschmerz, I approached this is an album, this is a collection of material. It's not just a bundle of unrelated songs, and I find that when I started in 1982, formats were vinyl and cassette. I'd never heard of it, but I would love to find an 8-track of Misplaced Childhood if there's one. But by the time I got to 85, it was CDs and cassettes and vinyl, and then cassettes disappeared, and then suddenly it's digital. And this new music business I find it difficult to relate to. I moved back up to Scotland in 1989 after I left my previous band and set up here, and I deliberately wanted to come back to Scotland and extricate myself from the London swamp. So I came up here, and and then it was a definite sense of independence, and this is where I am. 94, I left. 93, I left. Was dropped by Polydor, and I went independent, and I've never regretted it. And at this moment in time in my life, in the middle of this COVID situation, if I had been with a major label, I would have been handed in the Weltschmerz album and probably waiting for a release in 2022 or 2021 with no touring. And I would have been forced in a position where, you're phoning up begging, with your hat in hand to the record company going, can I have another advance check, please? Whereas where I am at the moment, we are completely independent. We only sell through fishmusic.scot. I don't do it. I don't go to, I don't have a distribution deal. I don't want one. We don't sell on Amazon. We only sell it here. And, I sell an awful lot more, a lot less records than I did on, for example, Vigil in the Wilderness of Mirrors, my first solo album. But, we don't need that much to maintain our lifestyle here. It's very simplistic. Most of the earnings my wife and I have go into the garden, our two biggest purchases in the year are season tickets for my beloved football club of Ernie in Edinburgh. We go into the stadium to see every 2 weeks. I don't drive a flash car. I don't have a yacht. I don't have a mansion. The building we live in is perfect for our needs, and that's why I don't feel the pressure of having to sell millions of albums. I don't have that kind of lifestyle, and that's why I'm quite happy to maintain the kind of style that we have in dealing with this. I was, before I came on to do this interview with you, I was sitting there, I was on the customer service email line, questions for fans, while my wife was through there, dealing with orders and peeling stickers off to put on packages that the 4 guys are doing on the other side of the window of the control room. This is what it's like now, and it works, I've got no regrets about not being in a big band. I hated the intrusion on my private life, when I was, in a more successful period of my life. But it's all relative, and I'm really happy where I am, and I was really happy when, when Simona, my wife, and I sat down on the couch and listened to the final mix in the correct order that Callum Malcolm, a producer, sent down. We opened up our first bottle of wine for 6 months and sat, and it was a great feeling. It was like, we've done it. I've achieved what I set out to achieve, which was to end my career with a great album, And this is the album, that I always wanted to hear when I was 18. And it's the album that I've always wanted to make as a musician,
And I can't say enough great things about the record. I've been listening to it pretty constantly since I was able to get the advance of it.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that's the worry, though, right? Because when you put, at the moment, if this was 5 years, 6 years ago, I mean, we've got Gardener Remembrance out there as a radio track, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's nobody's playing. Everybody wants to play Kaylee or Lavender or whatever,
Yeah.
And it's like, 5 years ago, I would have been, becoming irate, phoning up my press and radio people, going like, why is this happening? But now I just go, I don't care. I've just written a great song. It'll be a great song in 10 years' time. And it'll be a great song whether it's played on national radio or not. And that's my attitude with this album. There's no pressure on it to be successful. But at the same time, what I set out to do in 2015 was to write an album that was going to be, a high watermark in my career. And, and in doing that, when you make an album like that, and you take the cork out of the bottle and unleash the genie, you don't know what's going to happen with the genie. And this is there is a slight bit of trepidation in all this. And my wife and I have talked about it. We're going, well, what happens if this is a massive, massive album? What do we do? And we both agreed that, we're going to stick to the plan, and it's,
Well, I was doing an interview with someone the other day, and we were talking about how kind of your definition of success is different at a certain age than it was when you were 25. And now the definition of success is, just the artistic statement that this record is. And that's really all you need at this point.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, that's it. I mean, I'm proud of this album. I don't need to say anything else. The album speaks for itself, I mean, and it's going to be interesting to see. And, it's always a strange feeling for an artist once you made an album and once you set it out into the world, it's no longer yours. I'm saying the cork's out of the bottle. The album doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to other people, and it's an interesting, that shift is unique. It's a very strange shift for an artist, when you've spent so long working on something and then it's out there, and people judge it and people read into what they read into it, and things. It's but like I said, I mean, this album is very different for me. It's I'm just really proud of it, and what happens to this album happens to this album. But I think it's going to be a really slow grower, because I think it's going to, the best way that music can move is through word of mouth, right?
Yes.
And I think this is going to be an album that people are going to hear and tell their buddy, or, tell a mate or play to their friends, and somebody's going to go, oh, wow. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination this is a similar album, but, when I was a kid, Dark Side of the Moon, I heard it about a year after its release.
Mm-hmm.
It was, and it was somebody played it to me, and I went, wow, this is brilliant, and that's where I think Weltschmerz will go. I mean, like I said, I don't expect it anywhere near Dark Side of the Moon standards, but I think it's an album that's going to perpetually grow, and find new listeners. And I think, that's an album that I like to have,
Without a doubt. And again, the album's entitled Weltschmerz. It is out on September 25th. You can get it directly through Fish's website. That's the only place you can get the physical copies. And I highly recommend the physical copies, because you get all of that amazing Mark Wilkinson artwork as well as Fish's liner notes in it. And it just becomes a piece of art. It really does. And Fish, just personally, again, I'd like to thank you. Your words have stood tall for me through my entire life. So this is sort of the end of an era from your fans as well with your last record. But we look forward to the next chapter and your continued writing. We wish you all the best, and I just can't thank you enough for everything. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jeff. It was lovely talking to you, man. Glad we got this together.
Definitely. Best of luck with the record.
Okay, Jeff. Take care.
Thanks. You too. Bye.
Bye then.